All right, today we're watching French Revolution, Death of the Old Regime. This was made by the National Broadcasting Company, Encyclopedia Britannica Films Incorporated. Publication date 1966. This one's not that long, it's only 17 minutes. All right, yeah, Encyclopedia Britannica presents The French Revolution, Death of the Old Regime, an NBC News feature. All right, that's interesting. It didn't say that in the description. An NBC News feature made from, what was the year? 1966. And hang on, I want to go back to this flag real quick because I like that flag. It's an interesting flag. You don't see this anymore. This must have been the flag of the old regime, I guess. Probably, right? This is the fleur-de-lis, four in the corner. See, I knew a French flag that had like gold fleur-de-lises like all over it. So I don't know exactly what period of history this is. I'm not that familiar with the French Revolution. That's kind of why I wanted to watch this. I learned about it in AP Euro. But a cool flag. I would never learned that flag. And this is an amazing looking palace.
By 1787, Versailles, for all its splendor,
it is Versailles. Okay. I've been there.
was becoming a relic of past glories. While Frenchmen were gripped by a new age of learning, Versailles, and those who lived here, represented a backward-looking society where birth outweighed ability. Versailles stood also for the extravagance of French kings, from Louis XIV to the present Louis XVI.
You just know to open those doors, they needed two people on either side to open them. That's just, I love old filmmaking like that, where it's, nobody needed these two doors to open for this shot to work. But they wanted it. Whoever was directing, I didn't look, but whoever was in charge of this, they were like, we need those doors to open.
The richness they created drained their treasuries. The American War of Independence...
Yeah, Versailles is absolutely insane. I didn't actually get to go inside Versailles when I went, though, so this is actually going to be a lot of fun to get to see what this palace actually looks like.
To which France contributed not only revolution...
God, there's so much gold trim on everything. I sometimes think that that's not real gold because I think there's no way they possibly could have been that rich. But then you realize, no, they didn't even have fake gold. Real gold was the only gold they had back then. So this is an insane display of wealth right here.
Revolutionary ideas, but arms, money, and men had proven a crushing burden on the royal wealth. But the Hall of Mirrors seemed to reflect the image of a stable monarchy, assured of its power. A deceptive image.
This is like an absolutely awesome hallway. I don't know if there are spaces in these archways. I don't know exactly what's going on here, but it looks like there's seats on the ground of this hallway. Are people supposed to sit here? It looks like there's a candelabra or something beyond these pathways. I don't know.
France was impatient for something new. Currents of reform were at work, triggering immense forces soon to rock both state and church.
Damn, that's their church? See, that's the thing, is like Versailles was so rich, but this looks like a pretty gothic cathedral.
Divine right of kings, up to now Europe's great stabilizer, was even being questioned. In 1787, the man who ruled over
1787, all right. Remember that,
Versailles and France by divine right was His Most Christian Majesty Louis XVI. An absolute...
I remember Louis XVI from sophomore year, from AP Euro.
So slow-witted that even his courtiers sometimes laughed at him. A heavy eater and drinker, a hunter and do-it-yourself locksmith. Above all, a good...
See, I like that. He's a do-it-yourself locksmith. That's something that you don't really learn about the royals, is what weird little hobbies they had to keep themselves entertained. A do-it-yourself locksmith. That's weird. Is he just, like, breaking into people's rooms or something?
Husband and father. The Queen, Marie Antoinette, shared her husband's devotion to their children, the Dauphin, his brother and sister. But Marie Antoinette was very different from the plodding, simple king.
I remember Marie Antoinette also. I don't think good things happened to her, but we'll see.
She'd come to Versailles from her father's imperial court at Vienna, a proud, pleasure-loving, flirtatious girl.
Interesting way to describe the Queen of France.
Many Frenchmen saw in her a symbol of their country's ills. Crisis came to Versailles when Louis, still looking for a way to pay his bills, planned a new land tax. The result was furor among the landowning nobility. Leading nobles defied the king, refused to pay. Convene the Estates General, they challenged.
I think I have footage of this statue on one of my SD cards. I think this is at the back of Versailles, right? You go into the front and then the back is where all the gardens are. I remember taking footage of the statues here. I don't know why, but I remember having it. I don't know if it was these. There were tons of statues in Versailles. But I think there were like one or two specific like fountain-based statues. But none of you are going to see that for this video, so I don't know if that matters to bring up. But I remember being here.
This half-forgotten assembly had last met by royal pleasure 173 years before.
Oh, the fountain was off when I was there. I didn't take footage of this, but I remember seeing it because the fountain was off.
Soon the whole country was crying for a new session at which to air its grievances. Beyond the park of Versailles, Paris and the provinces flared into turmoil. The king stalled for time, finally gave in. Elections to the Estates General were ordered.
Wow, just like that? I feel like that's a more notable change in their government structure. Yeah, just like that, there's going to be elections all of a sudden, you know.
May 1789, after months of preparation, the estates met in Versailles with an opening procession of the three orders. Here were the nobles, whose resistance to royal taxation had brought about the meeting.
See, that's interesting. Louis imposed a land tax in order to pay for Versailles, and that caused the noble people to protest. What did it say?
Here were the nobles.
The nobles.
Resistance to royal taxation had brought...
Resistance to royal taxation. Isn't that funny how it always comes back to that for some reason? Royal taxation. Interesting.
Also in gold-trimmed robes, the clergy, mostly from the church's own nobility.
So those are two of the three houses, right? Nobility and churchmen whose robes are gilded in gold. Interesting.
But by now, the center of hopes for a constitution to limit the king's power had shifted to the third estate, the commoners, dressed by government order in modest black, but already on its way to be...
That's really funny. Dressed by government's orders in modest black, and all what they're wearing are like the fanciest clothes in modern day. You know, like if you saw a group of people dressed like this, you would think that you'd been, I don't know, run into like the fanciest wedding you've ever been to. It's just funny to think that these are the commoners. Even though it was the House of Commoners, I bet these guys were like, I don't know, like the blacksmith business owners and like the, I don't know, the big farmers or whatever. I doubt these were just like random people on the streets.
Of the reluctant hosts to this assembly, an American tourist who watched the procession wrote in his diary, "Neither the king nor queen appeared too well pleased."
I never knew that either. There was an American tourist in in the chambers or whatever. That's so funny. I didn't even realize when. Oh man, I said remember this, but I'm not remembering. I thought they said 1757. Maybe they said 1787. It's crazy that they were even referring to people as Americans back then, because that was really just right at the beginning.
As the estates began their sessions, the commoners outnumbered nobles and clergy. To keep them in check, the king and his ministers tried to rig the voting, so the upper two estates, clergy and nobility, would have control, as had always been the custom. No, said the third, and for more than a month refused to budge.
Oh, is this the tennis court oath? I'm just going to say it. Is this the... I remember that specifically. The third estate refused to leave until they got a constitution written. Is that what's happening here? I don't remember if that's what's happening here, but I think that is.
Forced into action when Louis had it locked out of its meeting hall. The members moved to a nearby indoor tennis court.
Tennis court. I do remember. All right. And then they made the oath.
Figure was a member named Mirabeau, who was soon to defy royal authority. When a court messenger...
Mirabeau. See, I don't remember that name. That's interesting. I feel like anyone associated with this, I should know. Like, I knew Louis the 16th. I knew Marie Antoinette. I knew the House of Nobles and clergymen. But maybe we'll learn something new from this.
The bull-voiced Mirabeau answered for them all.
Mirabeau.
We are here by the will of the people and can be removed only by force of bayonets. Presided over by an...
What's interesting to think about, that just made me think, he said us the people, and this must have been, I mean, I remember learning about this in school, but this must have been influenced by the American Revolution to see them reject the king's rule and instead employ, common people to elect the rules. It's very clearly what these people are inspired by. And it's interesting to see that even like immediately after America even started existing, people like France, like probably the most advanced society, at least in Europe, if not the whole world, took America's lead almost instantly after America came onto the scene, which is it's just crazy to think.
Astronomer named Bailly, the members of the Third Estate made the tennis court the scene of an historic oath, never to separate and to keep on assembling wherever necessary until the Constitution.
That is crazy, though, that they just met in a tennis court. Like, first off, that the fact that they even, like, had tennis courts, I feel like, did they have tennis balls? Aren't tennis balls, like, rubber and, like, I don't know, fake? I guess they must have been real tennis balls. It's just funny to think that, like, of all places where France, like, obtained its truest form of, like, freedom is just a tennis court. I guess that's history for you, though.
Established. The king submitted finally to the oath of the tennis court. The Third Estate, joined eventually by the other estates, became the assembly of the French nation. In Paris, 15 miles away, there were clashes between citizens and troops, following rumors that king and court planned to disband the assembly by force.
I also find this form of production so funny because half of these are just still images that they're pushing in on or panning over, which is pretty much exactly what you do today to make YouTube videos, except, you do it all in the computer, so it's perfectly smooth. But all of these pan overs or push-ins, it looks like they're all using a camera and either moving the paper towards the camera or moving the camera towards the paper. But either way, you get this, like, shaky, like, handheld scroll.
15 miles away, there were clashes between citizens and troops, following rumors that king and court planned to disband the assembly by force to restore the monarch's absolute authority. Someone remembered...
Was that just an elephant trunk I heard? That must have been an elephant trunk.
Someone remembered the Invalides, an old soldier's home used also as weapons storehouse. Parisians, already panicky over a threatened bread famine, took up the cry, "To arms, to arms." The crowd surged into the Invalides. Over nervous...
Wait, is this the storming of the Bastille? Am I getting my events mixed up? I learned this all so long ago, and, like, I don't know, the American education system isn't the best, so I don't really have a good understanding of how these events tied together, but I know that this happened, and this feels like they're storming something. So let's see if I'm right.
From the superintendent.
No, right? Wasn't that like the day before Christmas? Gotta love all this like footage without any people in it because they probably didn't have costumes or anything. They just had all these artifacts or spears or whatever these are lying around. Like, none of these shots include people at all for some reason. And I wonder why. Do you think you'd have to pay them as actors instead of just, like, production hands? I don't know. It's funny that there's no people in these. Like, they went through all the effort of, getting props, getting a location, getting cameras, getting everything, and then they're just not showing the people. I wonder why.
20 cannons were confiscated. And from the cellars, 26,000 rifles were taken.
All right, I don't think this was the storming of the Bastille, actually. I just need to say that.
By now, the crowd had picked a target for its frenzy. The goal was the Bastille.
Oh, actually. All right, I spoke too soon.
Walled fortress where political prisoners were kept. Guarded by...
Wow, this is an actually insane event to imagine. It's sad, but all I really have to put this into context for me is like January 6th. Like, this feels akin to that, but in a different way. In like it's just a crazy crowd going absolutely nuts for whatever they want. And I guess for France this was a good thing, but it's so easy to think of history as just something that happened. But for these people at this time, this was unheard of, to just be rebelling like this, to be stealing guns and cannons and storming off to the Bastille to release political prisoners.
Guarded by a military garrison, the armed people of Paris converged on this symbol of royal authority. The brief siege ended when a gate was opened mysteriously from inside.
Wow, another January 6th parallel. Somebody mysteriously opened the doors of the Bastille. I wonder who. I wonder if that's like some weird French conspiracy theory now. Like, who opened the Bastille doors?
Giving the crowd access. Within minutes of surrendering his garrison, the warden was hacked to pieces, his head borne off on a pike by a crowd angered by its losses. 100 killed in the battle.
That would ruin it for me. If I was like a peasant, this would be a lot of fun, right? Storming through the streets, grabbing a gun from like an armory, that would have been a lot of fun. But the second I see somebody getting like hacked apart, I think I'm going home. I think I'm like, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I want to do this anymore. It's hard to imagine yourself in these people's shoes, and you obviously you want to say that you would be disturbed by these disturbing things, but at the same time there must have been such an anger, there must have been such a mood in this crowd. I don't know, it's obviously horrible, but at the same time I guess that's history.
But when it was over, only 7 prisoners were found in the Bastille.
Wow.
More important, one of
I didn't know that. I didn't know only 7 were in the Bastille. Were there any important ones even? Like, did it matter? Was there like one in particular that everyone was like, I don't know, worried about? If there was a leader of this movement and then they put them in the Bastille, I can understand them storming it and freeing the one person who like led them. But I just don't understand what they would have gotten from freeing 7 prisoners.
Europe's most impregnable fortresses, symbol of the old order, had been stormed and taken by a mob. It was dismantled by the people of Paris. On that day, July 14th, 1789, Louis XVI came back to Versailles from an unsuccessful day's hunting and made a one-word entry in his diary. Rien. Nothing.
Nothing. That's so funny. See, that's like, that I guess is the perfect example of how detached from reality these monarchs were. That he just went hunting. His whole city is like rioting and he just went for a hunt. Nobody could tell him either because it was before any form of communication like that. And he was just like, yeah, nothing happened. That's so that's so funny and so telling about his state of mind going into all this. Like imagine coming back home from a hunting trip, thinking that nothing has happened, that you're just bored, and then somebody comes up and tells you, hey, by the way, our entire Paris is burning. I can only imagine.
The uprising in Paris continued, finally forcing Louis to take notice. 3 days after the Bastille, he came to the rebellion-torn capital. There he...
3 days after. So that must have been like the most insane 3 days in Paris ever, right? Like the monarch is not showing. All order has broken down. There's just mobs running amok.
He was met by officials of a new city government, set up independently of royal approval. Strong man...
See, that is awesome though. That it only took like 3 days of revolution in the capital. See, that never could have happened in America. America was so spread out and so sparsely populated. There wasn't actually even a big city there. And there wasn't a city that had a king. Like the king was all the way across the water. So I guess, again, there's a lot of parallels here because they had to do this without the king. Even though the king was in the same city, that was still enough distance for them to form their own government completely without
Paris now was its liberal military commander, Lafayette.
I know Lafayette. I've heard about Lafayette. I don't know if this is the same Lafayette. It must have been, right? The same Lafayette that was in the American Revolution. There was one very notable Frenchman, Lafayette Square, Lafayette everything. If you go to Washington, D.C., you'll see Lafayette. But I wonder if this is the same one. Like, is that a common name? I feel like that's the only like real Frenchy name that I know from like American history. But there could just be like a really common name.
The new tricolored cockade of revolution. White still for the monarchy, but with red and blue added. The colors of a Paris in revolt.
That's interesting. I didn't know that either, that the French flag, the modern French flag, came out of this event too. They kept the white for the monarchy, but then they changed the red and the blue for, I guess, themselves.
Impromptu ceremony of acceptance, Louis bowed to a new order for France. An order based on king and constitution.
Wow, see, that is crazy. I think the French Revolution is something that's worth learning about. I guess more in a European context than in an American context, because this really doesn't compare to the American Revolution in terms of like high drama. It happened over like, 3 days? There was a whole war in America against an empire, and I guess the French took part in that too, but this is the first time something like this ever happened in Europe, I believe. You know, I could be wrong. I don't know every freedom movement that ever happened, but this really feels like the first successful democratic uprising to happen in Europe. And I think that alone makes it worth studying, because I feel like this event is the foundational event of like all European-based democracy at a certain point. Like, this is the first time it entered and took seed in the society itself. That's very interesting.
The nobility's fear of taxes, they had never paid any.
The nobility's fear of taxes, they had never paid any. See, that just seems like not good economic policy, right? Like, these people have all the money and you're not going to tax them, but all the poor people who have no money, like probably literally no money, you're going to tax them. It just, I get why people, revolted after this, but it just, how do you get money? Like, I'm so curious how nobility works too, because you're born into it. But like, where do those bloodlines all trace back to? How did the royal families just start? Because there are so many in Europe, or the noble families at least. Like, because I always tie it back to the Roman Empire. Were the noble families like the generals in the Roman army or something? Because that would be really cool, actually. But I just wonder like how the nobles got such good treatment. Probably because they controlled everything too. That's probably why. I don't know how you justify not taxing the nobles unless you're controlled by the nobles. So that's probably what was actually happening, is the king was probably propped up by all the nobles who actually controlled stuff. They forced no taxation on themselves. Which is very interesting. Very bad idea, if you ask me. It ended in revolution, so you already know.
The Paris mob's fear of massacre had combined to start a revolution. But the French Revolution had deeper roots than these. It owed much of its origin to salons like this one, where a brilliantly intellectual society met to criticize the existing order. There had been Voltaire, who said, "I disapprove of what you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it."
Wow, shout out to Voltaire for saying that. That's a quote people still use to this day.
It was in the salons of Paris that Franklin and later Jefferson met to exchange ideas with the philosophers and politicians of the day. The American Revolution received much from and gave much to the life and work of French intellectuals.
See, I feel like that's important to say. Hang on, I want to go back to this salon. So that's where the elite used to gather, were these salons. Again, this is just like the part of history that's lost is like, why? Like, I guess you forget that everyone was probably just so bored all the time because they didn't have anything else to do. They might as well just go to like a really fancy salon and just like gossip about the king. And that's probably what it was. It was just like gossiping and, spreading rumors. And then eventually, those rumors turn into action and the desire for action at the very least.
Received much from and gave much to the life and work of French intellectuals.
The Americans gave much life to the works of French intellectuals. Just, his words, not mine, just saying it.
The Social Contract was one of the most influential books of the age, authored by a man whose impact, even today, is great. A man who believed that society was a contract in which the rulers, too, had obligations. He was the Swiss-born Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a romantic in an age of reason. Rousseau believed that man was over-civilized, that he must return to a more natural state.
That's an interesting belief. Man was over-civilized and must return to a natural state. And I think that's interesting because I feel like that idea has come back. I feel like a lot of the time people talk about how they spend too much time on the computer, too much time on the phone, too much time on TikTok. You just need to get back into nature, right? Like we hear stories like that all the time of just get back to nature, get back to the simple ways. I think we also we are over-civilized and we need to be more, more natural.
He rejected the formality of his day and urged a return to nature, as in this informal garden.
But see, I like this guy already. What was his name? Rousseau? Jean-Jacques Rousseau?
He was the Swiss-born Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He says it weird. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I'm just going to take a wild guess and say it was probably more like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But that's just me.
Rousseau believed that man was over-civilized, that he must return to a more natural state.
Man was over-civilized. He must return to a more natural state. It's funny that they had these thoughts like 300 years ago, right? Like, they didn't have computers. I don't even know if they had they must have had widely printed books, but they didn't have computers. They didn't have TikTok. They didn't have any sort of technology to keep them indoors as much. And they were already feeling like they were overly civilized. That's so interesting. I wonder if people even further back thought the same thing. Like if, ancient Egyptians thought that they had it too easy now. Because really, what were they doing? They were just chilling in empty rooms with no TVs on.
Normality of his day and urged a return to nature, as in this informal garden.
Oh, that's what I was saying. I like it. I like that he's gardening. Informal gardening.
1789,
show us his garden, please.
the ideas that sparked the revolution had already been overtaken by events.
It wasn't much, but it did look nice.
In the countryside, home of 4 Frenchmen out of 5, the peasants still bore heavy feudal duties. Under these, they paid or provided rents, taxes, payments, personal services to the landowners, members of nobility and clergy.
That is crazy. Hang on, that's a crazy image. Just this peasant, no, this is a political cartoon, but the peasant with the hoe in the ground with these 2 noblemen riding him, that's I don't know, that's perfect. That's a perfect illustration of, I think, what was going on at the time. It's just crazy that these noblemen's whole lives relied on these peasants. None of them could afford anything or have any ability to do anything without these peasants, slaving away day after day. It's just, I think people forget a lot of the time too that before democracy or whatever in Europe and pretty much most of the world, peasants were pretty much just slaves. They were owned a lot of the time just as property to the landlord or whoever, owned the land, the king, the emperor. They were just property and they were used as property. You don't really remember that democracy wasn't only about government. It was about, not being enslaved by these people anymore. And that's why you watch stuff like this, so that you remember that.
To the landowners, members of nobility and clergy, in return for use of the land. When news came of successful revolts in the cities, peasants all over France were quick to follow suit. The target...
This must have been a crazy time. You hear that people successfully revolted in Paris 2 weeks ago, and you're like, all right, I'm picking up the pitchfork and we're just going crazy trying to do the same thing. It's crazy because how information was transferred back in the day. They weren't getting... Maybe this was delivered by mail, but it was probably just people telling each other this was happening. So it's how fast does that information travel around a whole country?
It was the local chateau, seat of the landowner. Here, the feudal charters which gave the landlord his rights were seized by the peasants and destroyed. Often the chateau itself, a symbol of feudalism, was demolished too.
See, that's a shame because I bet these were really nice chateaus back in the day. And to think that they burned down, I get it as a peasant. These people are literally your oppressors, but it's just a shame we had to burn down such nice buildings. It's just a shame also because these peasants are probably the ones who worked to build it in the first place. So it's probably fine,
In some cases, the landowner was killed by angry peasants. Revolution was now reaching the farthest corners of France. Unrest in the countryside soon brought political results. In a single night, the Assembly voted to end feudal privileges of nobility and clergy. Then the Assembly adopted a Declaration of the Rights of Man. This was the spirit of 1789. Liberty, equality, government for the people. These reforms brought rejoicing to many, but to certain members of the nobility, the loss of privileges was too much. They packed their bags and left the country. Among them...
That's funny. They just left. That's just so telling that the second people got rights and power, they left. They were like, no more, I'm out of here. I wonder where they moved. Maybe, I mean, other places in Europe, but like, if your country's becoming too democratic, where do you move, you know?
The king's brother. At Versailles alone, this exodus emptied 2 wings of the palace.
That's crazy too. I didn't realize that there were like other nobles living in Versailles. I thought it was just like, I don't know, the king and his family. There's like 2 full wings filled with nobles living here. It is a giant palace, so that makes sense. But it's just so funny that how isolated, because I've been to Versailles. I said that Versailles is on like the way outskirts of Paris. It is not in the center. Like pretty much, it feels like a different place. I think it is. Like it really has, the city it's in is sort of a different city. It's a small city within Paris, but it's really on the outskirts. So it is funny to think of all these royal people just leaving, being like, you know what? We had a good run. Let's go to Germany and try to set up our noble family there instead.
For those who remained behind at Versailles, the pleasures of court life continued.
I am glad that the peasants didn't burn down Versailles. I feel like that would have really been a waste. Like all the effort, all the freaking countries that needed to be conquered, all the, you know, I don't even know how they got the money for this, really. I guess they said taxing the peasants, right? They didn't, what is it, 1700s? The French weren't really into colonialism yet, so I guess this must have just been taxing the peasants.
One night in October 1789, officers of the king's bodyguard held a banquet graced by the presence of the queen. They toasted her, sang loyal songs. Some said they trampled underfoot the red, white, and blue cockade, symbol of revolution.
Oh, wow. Is that what it comes from? Cockade? I've never heard of those. Are those like little ribbons that you tie up or something? That's interesting, though. I wonder where they got these and what the actual use was for them. That's a cultural aspect that has been lost to me in American. If French people know what these are, cockades, I think he said they were. I don't know how to even spell that, but if you guys know what these are, let me know.
News of this incident reached a Paris already made restless by...
Again, I love the random people just holding pitchforks and scythes. Is this a Phrygian hat? Just on a stick? Did people really do that? Did they put hats on a stick like this? Or is that just like an anachronism? Like wouldn't they be wearing them? I don't know. This guy's got a spear over here. And it's funny how this is modern day Paris, that they're just like charging through getting the footage. Like they're trying to make it look like, you know, age appropriate, which I guess all these buildings probably were built around the same time as all this, but it's just funny to think that like there's probably just cars passing by on the street that you can't see. That's probably why you can't see the people, because they can't have the camera pointing down, or else you'll see cars on the street and everything. That's probably why they are just doing the pitchforks and the scythes and Phrygian hat sticks.
Economic troubles, and by the king's resistance to the new constitution.
Like this shot? Like how do you even get this shot? All right, this is on ground level. Like are people crawling? Are there children? Like look at where the camera is. Like the camera is at like normal height. For there not to be people in this shot, they need to be like crouched on the ground doing this, which is so funny because if you look at the way the weapons bounce up and down, like it's totally faked, but it's like, I don't know, they must be like crawling. Again, how do you get these shots and not get people in them? Like, it's a creative choice that whoever was making this made, that they didn't want people in it. They just wanted the pitchforks, which does a good job at conveying that there is a crowd without actually needing to pay actors to show a crowd. But it's very funny when you just see an inanimate spear jumping across on screen like that. Because there must have been so many people here too, right? Like each one of these has to be held by a different person. Like how many people are just like crowded under the camera, thrusting up with their, you know, pitchforks? It's funny because you never really think about stuff. Like how did they actually make the pitchfork scene without people? Like what positions were they in?
Lafayette's troops checked the mob, but in the courtyard below it continued to demonstrate, shouting now for the king to come to Paris. Louis refused haughtily to take notice of the mob. Then Lafayette's advice prevailed, and the king and queen appeared on the balcony together with Lafayette.
Again, people must have been opening those doors. They did a better job of getting them open at
When
the same
Louis
time.
said he would be willing to go to Paris, the mob changed from threats to cheers.
Can I just say, I don't know, of all these things, there's spears, there's scythes, there's the Phrygian hat. I don't know what this little stick that has 2 prongs on it. I don't know what that is. That keeps catching my eye. And it must be some sort of farming tool, but I don't know enough about farming to know what that is.
At last, a strange procession set out from Versailles to Paris. In the carriage, the royal...
This shot is hilarious too, because they must have had a camera, and then they must have had somebody, there's probably one person coming around the camera to hold the things like this in front of the camera, right? I bet this is just one person holding these. Yeah, it looks like those are their hands. And then, so hang on, so somebody, do you think the camera was strapped to their chest, or do you think, because they went into this carriage, so somebody must have opened the door. This is just, it's so funny to think about how they did this. Because this must have been a huge film camera too, not like a small digital camera. That's why you watch stuff like this, because they put so much effort in to just be forgotten that it's worth watching this stuff just to see the funny little camera tricks that they used to do. Or what I love about watching these old stuff too is just how everything is still pretty much the same. Like I went to Versailles. It looks exactly like this. It sounds dumb to say that, but like, really nothing has changed. There's no like satellite dishes on top or wires crisscrossing or anything. Like, it looks exactly like this. And I think that's the most fun part about watching old films like this in general, is just seeing things that you recognize just shown old, like this. I mean, I guess Versailles was already 300 years by the time they filmed this, but it's just so funny to see it. I guess it's not even back in the day. It's just like 50 years ago. It's funny because I waited in line to get into Versailles in this little courtyard. I don't know if that's how they still do it, but this courtyard is like the hottest place in the world in the summer. It's just flat with nothing but rocks, and you have to wait in line in this courtyard before they even let you. They don't even let you in here. They let you into the back here. So after waiting and after getting super hot and sweaty, all we had to do is go around back and then like stay by the water. Again, somebody must have opened that gate too, right?
The power in France had passed to Paris, to the Assembly and the mob. Versailles was history. Symbolically, the royal procession was escorted on its way by the triumphant demonstrators.
Yeah, imagine that. Imagine finally getting the king to come out on a carriage and like surrounding him. This must have been a crazy event. It's just, I feel like feelings that people had never been able to feel or to like express before in this moment.
Leading the procession, the heads of 2 royal bodyguards on pikes.
Jeez. Dang, see, people were not messing around back in the day. I think I'm just going home if I see that. Like, I don't really want to see that. I mean, the images are fine, but I think that would ruin my day. As a French peasant come to the city to, like, revolt, seeing a decapitated head would kind of kill the mood for me.
Now came a time of relative calm. For the first anniversary of the fall of the Bastille, Paris built an outdoor altar on which to celebrate France's unity. In a spirit of common labor, Lafayette's National Guard and the people turned out to prepare the ground for this Feast of Federation, a word borrowed from the American Revolution.
Wow, really? Did they borrow federation from the American Revolution? Or did they...
People turned out to prepare the ground for this Feast of Federation, a word borrowed from the American Revolution.
Feast of Federation. That's a good name for something. I don't know what, like a political thriller book. Feast of Federation, right? Like I could see that being written by like John Grisham.
King, now called first public official of the nation, lent a hand. At the ceremony, the king won applause by swearing publicly to uphold the new system. The revolution seemed to be complete. The monarchy had...
See, that's what's interesting about the French Revolution, I think, is the American Revolution completely did away with worshiping a king. Like, we cut ties and everything. But in France, because the king actually lived in France, they couldn't do that. They had to have the king accept the results. And that's just a completely different balancing act, is balancing old power versus new. In America, there was nothing but new power because there was no establishment in America. But in France, they still had to deal with the very deeply entrenched royal families, nobility, and clergymen, which is just something that this hasn't even mentioned. But it really does make you realize how amazing of an event this was in history, to see that, like, even in Paris where the king ruled, he was incapable of controlling the people.
To be absolute and had become constitutional, almost painlessly.
Almost painlessly. Ask the guy who got chopped up if it was painlessly, but yeah, almost painlessly, like not even a whole war. Oh, that's the end. All right, well, honestly, that is nice. 17 minutes. What I like about that is that was pretty much the length of like a regular YouTube video also about the French Revolution. Like I'm going to go to YouTube and I'm going to look up French Revolution and I'm going to see how many of them or how long they are. French Revolution. Oversimplified, let's see. No way, Oversimplified's video on the French Revolution is 17 minutes and 54 seconds, and this is 17 minutes and 48 seconds. So that's pretty much the amount of time it takes to teach somebody the French Revolution is 17 minutes just about. All right, Crash Course, their episode is 12 minutes. Crash Course, why are there two Crash Course French Revolutions? This one's like 16 minutes or 15 minutes. All right, so that is funny. This is pretty much the same exact length modern day YouTube videos on the French Revolution are. I guess now with my commentary, it's a bit longer. But just imagine watching that in your classroom today. I feel like all the information in that is still perfectly good. Like, this is still a perfectly good educational video. I think I actually do understand the French Revolution better now. It was always so vague as to why it started and what was even happening, but now I know that it was all about taxation again. Special projects for the classroom. So this was meant to be shown in school. See, whatever happened to that? I feel like there was a gap where people used to make educational videos for the classroom, and then I don't know, my education, I never got to watch videos. I probably would have understood the French Revolution much better had I watched this rather than had I been assigned a reading in a textbook. You know, like if it's between watching this or reading a textbook, no kid in school is ever going to read a textbook. But this was actually entertaining to watch. So I guess maybe not for a kid though, who knows. But that was fun. I enjoyed that. I think that's it, right? Yeah. I can't believe they didn't kill the king. That was really I thought that's where this was going. Knowing French history, I really thought that's where this was going. Yeah, I think that's it. I think we're done.